Hello, how are you? Today I'm going to tell you about an amazing flour for your bone health, for blood sugar, to help control inflammation, manage weight. It's a flour that's ultra rich in fiber, healthy fats, proteins, minerals. It doesn't contain gluten, and you can make it at home. It's a flour that you can use as a supplement or as a substitute. Even wheat flour can be replaced. This is a much healthier option with a delicious flavor that you're sure to love. Stay until the end. You won't want to miss this. Before we start, I want to ask you, what kind of flour do you use most at home? Is it wheat flour? Or is it a more nutritious type of flour? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Leave a like on the video. That's your way of helping me out too. If you know someone who's looking to swap their daily flour for a healthier alternative or just wants more variety in their diet, make sure to share this video with them. Let's grow this chain of kindness. That's what I want to do here on the channel. When most people think of flour, what comes to mind? Wheat flour, right? So automatically people think of carbohydrates. But there's a type of flour that fits into the idea of this video, and you can actually make it at home, right? Like I mentioned, I'll even give you some tips on how to make it. And I'll talk about the difference between making it at home and buying it ready-made. But it's an ultra-nutritious flour with very few net carbs, lots of fiber, protein, and wonderful fats. So these traditional flours are usually starch, refined, high glycemic index carbohydrates. But sesame flour is extremely interesting for our health. So this completely changes the body's metabolic response because digestion happens more slowly, glucose rises less rapidly, and energy remains more stable. So let's talk more about it. All the health benefits it offers, including how to make it at home, you're going to love it. Let's start by talking about this issue of blood sugar, satiety, reduced hunger, because that might be one of the most interesting aspects for us adding more sesame flour to our daily routine from a metabolic point of view. Because it combines three components that really help improve the way our body reacts after a meal, right? Naturally, it contains fiber, healthy fats, and protein. And this combination is very different from white flour, wheat flour. So when a flour is made up basically of starch, as is the case with refined white wheat flour, digestion happens very quickly. Glucose rises rapidly in the blood, the pancreas releases more insulin to try to control this spike, and shortly after comes that typical drop. It's almost like a glucose peak followed by a glucose crash. And this crash afterwards, this abrupt drop, makes you feel tired, shaky, and sometimes hungry. You get cravings, want to eat sweets, lack energy, and sometimes feel excessively sleepy after a meal where you ate a lot of simple carbohydrates. Whereas with sesame flour, the effect is completely the opposite. When it comes to appetite and even metabolic response, many people think it's just a matter of discipline, right? That we just need to focus in order to control what we eat, how much we consume, and so on. But many times, this is actually a physiological response from our own body, depending on how quickly that previous food was absorbed. Now compare this with sesame flour, because these fibers help slow down the absorption of food, the absorption of nutrients themselves. Fats slow gastric emptying, making the food stay longer in the digestive tract. And protein is directly involved in the activation of certain satiety mechanisms that are increasingly being studied, such as the influence of important intestinal hormones like GLP-1 and peptide YY, which are precisely involved in the sensation of hunger and satisfaction in the feeling of fullness after a meal. In practice, the result of consuming sesame flour more regularly tends to be greater stability, less glycemic spikes, and less of that reactive hunger, that compensatory hunger. And there's a very important concept for us to talk about as well, which is that it's not just about the amount of carbohydrates, but about the speed of the metabolic response, right? Because two foods can even have similar calories or even relatively similar amounts of carbohydrates. But depending on what else is in there, right? If it has fiber or not, if it has protein or not, if it has fat or not, the metabolic response can be completely different. One can cause a rapid spike, a quick drop, and early hunger when it is completely lacking in other nutrients. It's only really rich in carbohydrates. And another can lead to slower, more gradual digestion, more stable energy, and greater satiety. That's why it makes a big difference, especially when you consume sesame flour in cases of insulin resistance, prediabetes, metabolic syndrome, or even if you're on a low-carb diet or if you're someone who feels hungry quickly after eating. The problem sometimes isn't just eating too much, it's eating in an unbalanced way and living in this constant cycle of hunger, glucose spikes, insulin spikes, glucose drops, hunger. It's like a hamster wheel that you can't get off. There's another very interesting point about consuming sesame flour, which has to do with fiber and the gut microbiota, because it has a lot of fiber and doesn't just help with satiety. We know that the gut acts very much like a major metabolic control center in our body. It plays a role in digestion, nutrient absorption, immunity, inflammation, and even in how the body regulates blood sugar and hunger itself. And we also know about the role that the gut microbiota plays in intestinal health. The microbiota is the collection of trillions of bacteria that live in our gut, and these bacteria are not there by chance. They constantly interact with our body's metabolism and help produce beneficial compounds such as butyrates, acids, and short-chain glycerides, for example. And they can promote inflammation when there is an imbalance. So since sesame flour contains a large amount of healthy fiber, it can help with all these issues I mentioned to you. It's also worth emphasizing this matter of butyrate and soluble fibers, because when the diet is very rich in sugar, in glucose, in carbohydrates that quickly turn into sugar, right? As is the case with white flour, bad bacteria love this type of carbohydrate. They feed on it quickly, grow, proliferate, and thrive in environments with lots of sugar. Whereas soluble fibers facilitate and promote the growth of good bacteria. So they help balance this intestinal dysbiosis. So, more and more, butyrate, which is produced by the fermentation of these good fibers, has been attracting scientific attention because it can play a role, a balanced amount of it, in maintaining the integrity of the intestinal barrier, inflammatory balance, communication between the gut and the brain, and even in insulin sensitivity. Another benefit that we always think of regarding the consumption of sesame, in this case specifically sesame flour, has to do with bone health in a broader sense, because the concentration of calcium in sesame is very interesting. When we think about bone health, we usually think about minerals, about calcium, but we have to remember that bone is not a static structure, right? I've already mentioned this in other videos. In fact, it is a very biologically active structure, constantly being renewed, and there is a continuous process of wear, reconstruction, and bone remodeling. And for this to happen in a balanced way, in fact, we need several nutrients working together synergistically. Sesame stands out precisely because, in addition to having a large amount of calcium, it also contains magnesium, phosphorus, and zinc. And this combination is metabolically very interesting, right? Magnesium, for example, which we don't directly associate with bones, actually takes part in hundreds of reactions in our body. And it is extremely important for bone health. It is involved in the activation of vitamin D, muscle contraction, mineral bone balance, as well as the way calcium is used in our body. In other words, it's not enough to just think about consuming calcium, but rather foods that have this synergy, right, working together. Additionally, it is well worth emphasizing this crucial connection between your bones and the muscular aspect, given that superior muscle density is directly related to significantly better bone density as well. So since magnesium helps with muscle contraction, it makes perfect sense for us to think about this at this moment, right? Sesame seeds actually boast a really impressive amount of calcium, and there is a highly interesting detail to consider. Because of this rich profile, we can strategically incorporate sesame flour into those specific moments when you wouldn't normally consume traditional dairy sources during your daily routine, right? Maybe you don't drink milk anymore, but you're going to make pancakes in the morning for breakfast. You can add sesame flour there to ensure a good intake of calcium at that moment, even from non-dairy sources. So it ends up being extremely interesting in that sense. There's also another very interesting point because sesame is naturally rich in bioactive compounds such as sesamin, sesamol, and lignans, which are antioxidants. These are compounds that have been studied for their effects on oxidative stress, inflammation, and even vascular health. So it's very important for us to remember this issue about low-grade chronic inflammation, which is becoming increasingly prevalent nowadays, and how a balanced diet can help you in a complementary way to reduce this chronic inflammation in our bodies. There's also another very interesting point because sesame flour is a low-carb flour, meaning it's low in net carbohydrates. It contains a lot of fiber, as I mentioned, so these are carbs that are not absorbed, they're fermented, and they pass through our intestines intact. So this is very helpful for those following a low-carb diet and looking for different flour options to enrich their daily meals. So, in fact, it can be highly recommended for people who have insulin resistance, often feel hungry quickly throughout the day, those who follow a low-carb diet and want other flour options, as I mentioned to you, for people who want to reduce refined flour, sometimes by changing its proportion, right? Sometimes a person doesn't want to stop consuming white flour, but wants to start increasing the proportion of other types, and that's possible. It's a good idea for you to make a flour mix. People who are looking for more satiety, people who want to improve nutritional density, who want to improve their bone health. So it's very versatile and can be used in many different ways because often we say, I'm interested, but how do I put this into practice? How do I use this in our daily lives? Let's talk a little about that. Sesame flour works really well when we use it in breads, pancakes, muffins, or even in cookies, low-carb tortillas, or even for breading foods. So it can basically be added if you want in a super simple way to yogurt. In a yogurt where you add some fruit, you can put a little bit of sesame flour in there, or in your smoothie if you want to use it in a more intuitive way and less like a recipe, you know? So remember that a good base can be making a pancake with egg and a bit of sesame flour. And then you bake it, and it basically turns into a pancake or a wrap, depending on how thin you make it, and you can add whatever toppings you like. This is a super simple way to include it in your daily routine. In fact, I'll leave down below some recipes I've already made using ground sesame flour, so you can get an idea of how you can incorporate this into your daily life. The good thing about sesame flour is that you can make it at home, right? Just like when you take oats, blend them in a food processor, and they turn into oat flour, if you take sesame seeds and blend them in a food processor, they'll turn into sesame flour. And depending on how long you process it, it can even turn into tahini, which is that sesame paste widely used in Arabic cuisine, by the way. It's the same logic as peanut butter, you know. If you take peanuts and blend them a little, they turn into peanut flour. If you keep blending the peanuts, they turn into peanut butter. That's basically the idea. And an interesting detail is that the flour you make at home by grinding the seeds is a whole grain flour. It preserves all the healthy fats, the natural oils, and the fibers from the sesame. On the other hand, some flours sold in stores, already packaged, may be defatted. In some cases, the fat is removed so that the sesame oil can be used for other products or preparations. So notice that the homemade version usually has more healthy fats and a richer sesame flavor. The defatted one ends up being more concentrated in protein and fiber, has fewer calories, and a drier taste. So it will depend on what you want. Ideally, you would grind the sesame seeds right before using them so you have more nutrients available, the antioxidants, the unoxidized essential oils, which are more nutritious for us. If you are going to grind them, the best thing is to grind only the amount you will use and store very little for later use just in case. And always in a glass jar, in a dark place, inside a cupboard. Because since it's oily, right, it has good fats, if you leave it for too many days, it will oxidize, it will go rancid, it's pretty much the same as flaxseed. Ideally, you should grind it and use it right away. Let me know down below if you already knew about it, if you had already thought about or tried using this wonderful flour. I'd love to see your comment. Is there another type of flour that you use more often these days? Tell me. I'd love to see your comment. Leave a like on the video to help me out and share it with anyone who would enjoy it or needs it. Let's expand this chain of kindness because that's what I want here on the channel. See you next time. Bye.